Well, calls for answers from the FBI and the DOJ. This after U.S. gymnasts gave gut-wrenching testimony about the FBI's mishandling of sexual abuse complaints against team doctor Larry Nassar.
It was like serving innocent children up to a pedophile on a silver platter. That evening, I was naked, completely alone, with him on top of me, molesting me for hours. I told them I thought I was going to die that night because there was no way that he would let me go.
I sit before you today to raise my voice so that no little girl must endure what I, the athletes at this table, and the countless others who needlessly suffered under Nassar's guise of medical treatment, which we continue to endure today.
And the DOJ has come under fire for not attending that hearing. Allegations against Larry Nassar were first reported to the FBI in 2015. More than 2 years later, the team doctor pled guilty to criminal sexual misconduct after more than 150 women and girls said in court he'd sexually abused them. He's serving decades right now in prison. Well, the testimony was haunting and at times infuriating. The FBI and others failed these young girls, and we cannot overstate how big that scandal is. But right now, we want to focus on the victims of sexual abuse or the survivors of sexual abuse. It's difficult, but an important topic. What happens to young people who are sexually abused, and how can they try and heal from this trauma? We've invited Dr. Jacqueline Del Rosario on this morning to discuss. She's a counselor who has treated abuse survivors, and happy to have her here on the show. Wish we were talking about something different, Dr. Jackie, but happy to have you on Start Your Day. Let's talk about these gymnasts. They're brave, recounting some of their worst horrors of their life in front of the entire nation. They may never be able to really get past this overall, but for somebody who's gone through something that they've gone through, something that they've experienced, what's the first step, in your opinion, towards recovery?
The first step in recovery is talking about the trauma. It's being able to face it and to deal with it. You know, we can't get help unless we recognize that we're in need of help. And so treatment is essential. It's central to recovery for any victim of trauma, particularly sexual trauma.
How do you get them to talk about it? Because one of the things that we've always heard, like especially you go through any kind of trauma, you go through any kind of abuse, a lot of people are embarrassed by it. They don't want to come forward. They don't want to talk about it because they feel like maybe somebody's not going to help them. Maybe somebody's not going to believe them. Maybe once again, they're just embarrassed about it. So how do you get somebody to come forward and begin that process of talking about it?
I think information and education is really key, because once people understand the key tips about sexual abuse, they feel that they're more open and have options and opportunities to come forth and disclose. And so I think it needs to be discussed, and that's what we're doing. We're talking about what has happened to so many people. And so when they see that there's other people that have been in similar situations, I think it kind of musters the courage to go ahead and face the demons and to come out and discuss it. So I think even as Simone Biles had her struggles in the Olympics, so many people rallied around because they understood where she was coming from. They had also been affected by their mental health issues. And so I think that that's the beginning, for sure.
And how much does it help to see these young ladies, these women, once again, before the nation, coming out and reliving their worst nightmares? Seeing that, how much do you think that will help other people to come forward?
I think it will help tremendously. I myself was a victim of sexual abuse as a youngster. And what I do often is talk about what happened to me. And I do that so that other people can see, like, okay, she survived. And I think being a survivor is something that is also encouraging to other people, that I can, in front of other people, just like Simone and others have, talk about what happened to us. And then you don't feel so alienated and alone. You don't feel so guilty or so ashamed, because you see the example of other people that have gone through similar things. And it's tough. And moreover, what we see in these situations is that we're talking about complex traumas. So it wasn't just one occurrence a lot of times. It's ongoing and enduring. And so we're talking about an impact that is long-term. And so what do we know about complex traumas? We know several things. We know, first of all, that the impact of it is traumatic, and it's very enduring. A lot of people's lives, the arc of their lives is going to be changed for the long term. even getting assistance, even getting therapy and treatment, they're going to still have to make adjustments in their life to deal with the effects of those traumas. Number two, we also know that trauma has a health impact. Trauma, now we've learned, is generational. So it's actually encoded on your genetic material. So if I've been traumatized, my children will carry the impact of that trauma in their genetic material. What do we know about that? We know, number one, that most of them will have mental health issues that they'll have to combat. Number two, we know that biologically or physiologically, that there's an impact on their biological health. And I think that those are important for us to consider and to also face head on.
I want to get back to that in just a second for the last question, but I want to hit you on, because the gymnasts, they came forward, they did all the right things, they talked about it, they spoke up, and nobody helped them. What kind of effect do you think that has on their psyche?
Well, see, that's the responsibility of we as the public, not only parents, law enforcement, and caregivers. We have to do a better job with making sure that we acknowledge when someone comes forward to report, that we take all the proper steps to make sure that they feel supported, and that we definitely don't allow the victimization to continue. Regardless of people's position or their status, they are still violating other individuals, and it's criminal.
And of course, as a parent, we got to find the signs, if somebody's been abused or whatever. But if you are a parent, what are some of those signs that we can look forward to see or to kind of identify if our children have gone through some of these things? Is it as simple as just asking questions and making them feel comfortable about being able to talk to you?
Now, those are really good questions. First of all, as a parent, what I would recommend is that you begin to educate your child about what is proper, so that they understand their boundaries. No one should ever do this to you. No one should ever do that. And of course, the detail of that conversation changes based on their age, right? But then a parent should be aware of the signs as well. If your child has a very instant change in their normal routine and their normal mood and behavior, you definitely need to begin to probe. If they're not eating, if they're having outbursts of anger, if they're withdrawn or depressed, isolating, then those are definite signs. Now, if you know how Jackie behaves and she's acting differently all of a sudden, and she's just not acting like we've seen in the past, then you need to do your due diligence and begin to talk. But sometimes victims aren't always able to come forth on the first encounter when you begin to question. So it's something that you might begin to do even in increments. So you begin to let them know that you're here. You want to give them opportunity anytime you need me. I don't care what I'm doing. Feel free to interrupt me and come to me, and I'm going to be there. Because you already know in the back of your mind that something is up, and you need to help to create a safe space for them to feel that now they can begin to unload and begin to unpack those things that have occurred.
That's some really good advice, Dr. Jackie, and appreciate you giving it to us. And sorry that you had to go through that yourself. Before I let you go, you brought up something that triggered my mind. You passing down some of this trauma to future generations, some of your children, if you don't address it. We've also heard stories about, especially like in the R. Kelly situation, where, even though he's alleged these crimes, that he was abused as a child. And a lot of times you hear about hurting people, or people who are abused being the abusers later on. What can we do to stop this cycle from continuing to happen?
Well, one of the first thoughts that came to my mind when you mentioned that, because I was thinking about it as well. He himself experienced complex trauma. He wasn't just sexually abused once or by one individual. He was abused, I think it's reportedly, by males, females, family members. Let's just leave it at family members. And this continued over a long period of time. I think that what we have to look at is, how do we really begin to combat what happens routinely in our families? Because the thing about sexual trauma is it usually doesn't just happen in one generation. It is in and of itself intergenerational. So usually somebody in the family has been abused generation after generation after generation. Same thing with incest. Talk about it. Uncover it. I have a family member that told me in her early 20s about sexual abuse that had been going on for years. I was in the same setting with her. We would be at that family member's house together playing. Never happened to me, but it happened to her repeatedly over years of time. We had to bring that central to the family, to the extended family, and then make it aware. This is what's happening. Because you know what, if we did not, it will continue to happen even to those people's offspring. And so I think that conversation, that coming to Jesus moment, has to occur in families where they're able to really face the demons, or as some say, those skeletons in the closet, and talk about it so that we can be the first to say no more.
Yeah, and it happens so much, especially in the Black community. We've all heard the stories about somebody's uncle or grandfather or something like that. We got to stop this cycle and stop having our children being abused. Dr. Jackie, always a pleasure talking to you. Thank you for sharing your insight this morning with us on Start Your Day, and you got to come back again soon sometime.
It was my pleasure.